So Rich, the day that this episode releases, my daughter, she turns 7. So I want to give her a little bit of a shout out. Avery, happy birthday. Thanks for being the best daughter ever. You're compassionate, you're sweet, you're a great dancer, you're a great big sister. And you also don't take Justin Herbert 2 rounds ahead of ADP after I drafted Ladd McConkey, Nico Collins, and Amarian Hampton. And I love you for it. I'm JJ, and last year I tried my hardest to become a best ball bro. I drafted over 500 teams, I talked to some of the most successful best ball players in existence, and I admittedly had mixed results. So this year, I'm going to chase that title once again. My plan is to max enter DraftKings Millionaire Maker, and I'm going to document all of it while talking to the brightest best ball minds on the planet. Last year, I didn't quite get there, but this year, this is going to be the year where I officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft a $20 best ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. 1 per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get 1 bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined as always by my mustache-wearing Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
It's a gag. I don't want to give the game away because someone might be watching, but yes, I have a mustache. I'm in my mother's, not basement, but guest room in sunny Florida, enjoying some time with the cousins and some family, pool, ocean. It's been great. But yes, this thing, as soon as this thing can go, JJ, it's going to go.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I've never, honestly, the closest I've gotten to a full-blown mustache, it gets nixed immediately by my wife. So I've never gotten full mustache. Some will call me soft for that. I say that I'm smart for that at the end of the day.
Very much so.
But yeah, today I want to talk a little bit about, before we get into the guest, the interview I had. It's Davis Mattek, for any of you who are curious. But one of the things I want to talk about and kind of not rant per se, but just like discuss with you. And I hope that, you can at least bring some data to the table with, what I'm talking about and what I'm sort of contextualize the situation. Because I know that you have all this ADP data. But it seems like right now, I don't know if you're feeling this either. I'm really burying this. I'm just gonna stretch this out as long as I possibly can for like 15 minutes without actually saying anything.
Keep teasing them.
Just tease you guys. There's just this thing that no. So I'm surprised by the market's reactions to things, right? Like I would say that DraftKings ADP itself and the way that it's formulated, we've talked about this before, seems to be pretty reactionary based on recent drafts, and that's great, right? Like that to me is more beneficial than looking at, the full 4 months worth of data or 3 months worth of the Millie and saying, oh, this guy's not going to move up in ADP because there's so much back-weighted data that's going to bring his overall ADP down. So like, even if you do thousands of drafts right now, it's not going to bring that ADP up enough because there's so many drafts where he wasn't being drafted there. So I like that DraftKings ADP is reactive, but there's 3 instances where I just, I talked about one of them last week and it's still going on right now. And it's just bizarre to me. And I just want to walk through this. Okay. Because I want to see what other people are thinking, if they're experiencing the same thing, and maybe they just fully disagree with me. That's fine. That's what this whole entire freaking show is about, is me just kind of brain vomiting and documenting my feelings and thoughts about best ball as I'm becoming a best ball bro. So with that being said, the Kansas City wide receiver situation. Okay. Xavier Worthy's ADP has not shifted nearly as much as I thought it was going to shift. Like, I thought when the news broke about Rashee Rice, I thought the market was going to overcorrect so much to the point that Xavier Worthy was going to be like an early 3rd round pick. Like like pretty confidently, I thought that was going to happen. And I'm drafting Xavier Worthy at times in the exact same spot that he was being drafted before all of that news went down. And it's crazy to me, because if the assumption back then, even if it's by half of the market, if the assumption was that Rashee Rice was not going to be suspended and Xavier Worthy was, a late 4th round pick, in the 4th round still, but like a late 4th round pick. And then the news comes out where now the entire market kind of assumes and knows that Rashee Rice is going to be suspended, and Xavier Worthy's ADP, I'm still getting him in drafts in the mid 4th round consistently. Make it make sense. Rashee Rice's ADP has fallen, but Xavier Worthy's seems to be in the same spot. Is the data backing that up right now?
Yeah, so we're seeing a small uptick for Xavier Worthy. Week over week, he's up 2.3 spots. For the entire summer, he's up 4 spots. But last week, when we were with you guys, Rashee Rice was down a half round. This week, we're down an additional half round. So full round since the news broke, but that downward pressure that is affecting Rice negatively, like you said, is not affecting Xavier Worthy in a positive way as much. And we're not really seeing it in any of the other relevant pass catchers. Travis Kelce, neutral, down 0.4 spots. Hollywood Brown, similar uptick to Xavier Worthy, 3. So it's not like they're looking for alternate pieces later in the draft to steam up as opposed to drafting Xavier Worthy. It's just they don't like Rice, and there's no other reaction besides that.
Is the answer here that those guys were already priced with that? I don't know. I can't really comprehend why this is happening. To me, like, I know the arguments, right? Like we probably are overstating how 4 or 6 games and what that actually means to a best ball portfolio and like the actual production of that portfolio when there's no bye weeks during that time for the most part. Guys are healthy, so you're gonna be able to fill in that spot a lot easier, than you otherwise would if it was happening at the end of the year, for instance. Obviously, if it was happening at the end of the year, that's the playoff weeks. We wouldn't even be drafting Rashee Rice if we knew factually he wasn't gonna be playing, weeks 15 and 17, right? To 17. But it's still strange to me because I try to think through the various scenarios that could go down in these instances where there's no Rashee Rice. Okay, what does that mean? What does the Chiefs offense look like? Okay, well, maybe Jalen Royals steps up and he sees a little bit more action. That would be great, especially because the Zap model had the Rashee Rice comp of Jalen Royals, which would be just fun to see that kind of come to fruition. But then also, like, we know, and this goes back to when people were commenting on my mentions being like, Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice are 2 totally different wide receivers. Guys, I know. Okay, I know they're different wide receivers. But the idea here is that when you're projecting target share, there's 100% pie that goes around an offense, and that target share shifts to the talented and good players. And so if Rashee Rice is out, that's a very large target share pie that is hypothetically being spread around the offense, which then raises the rest of the offense, some more than others. So even if Xavier Worthy is not the same type of wide receiver as Rashee Rice is, he could still get a natural bump during the first 4, during the first 6 games, however long that suspension is, a nice bump in target share. And then the other thing that I think about is we saw the second half of last year, Xavier Worthy's ADOT fall. We saw him be used more horizontally than vertically, and that really helped his production. Now, he was still being used down the field, and I think that we're all hoping that they're able to push the ball down the field more this year. But, without Rashee Rice, some of those lower ADOT looks still might go to a Worthy at times. I'm not saying all of them will, but some of them might. And then there's the idea that if Rashee Rice is out for the first month and a half of the season, Xavier Worthy can establish himself in this offense more. He's a second-year ascending talent, right? Like, I wasn't even high on Worthy before all of this went down. I was actually low on Worthy before all this stuff went down. And the fact that the market hasn't shifted at all, I'm now at like 12% Xavier Worthy in my best ball portfolio because no one seems to want him. No one's going after him despite this news. And I get it. At the end of the day, people might look at this and be like, this news does not matter from a production standpoint. And maybe the most likely outcome is that because, again, early on in the season, you have people that can fill in your lineup and you feel fine about, taking those zeros from Rice and, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But I think more on sort of like the secondary level where we're looking at sort of how and telling a story of how a season can go down. There's a chance that Worthy just establishes himself more than he otherwise would have if Rashee Rice was there. And I don't think that we can discount that.
And normally I'm really hesitant to do a lot of vacated target analysis, especially year to year, because some things aren't sticky. Offenses change, quarterback play changes, play calling changes. This is one of those offenses, JJ. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes have been doing this for a while. They're on the same page. The style with which they play with is not going to change drastically. So when it comes to passing volume and scheme, things aren't going to change much for this team. So I think it's more fair to do some more vacated target analysis when it comes to Worthy than it does with a lot of other teams.
Yeah, and I also think, though, too, with the vacated target stuff, I think that one of the big downfalls in doing that and one of the problems that people run into when doing that, because look, especially in August when more of the mainstream sites are doing analysis and stuff like that and publishing content constantly, you're going to see articles that are like, here's how many vacated targets this team has and this team has, without, like, the reason why I look at target share is because it's always going to be 100%, whereas vacated targets are going to fluctuate based on how pass heavy that team is, right? Like Philadelphia could easily throw the ball 100 more times this year. And if that happens, any vacated, not that they're a great example because they basically have the same, pass catchers, but any vacated target is different, right? Because they could just throw the ball more than they did last year. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is a situation where I'm surprised, obviously in some drafts, you're going to see Worthy go in round 3, but I consistently am getting him in the middle of round 4. And to me, that's a sweet spot. Like, I think he's like a 3-4 turn type player, especially in a best ball environment where we know that he can generate those big plays where it might not be overly predictable like it would be with Rashee Rice in a normal season long league. Like, he might be a slightly better in best ball type player and an asset, which is another reason why I'm surprised he hasn't been moving up more. But, this will be it I am technically talking to Davis about Xavier Worthy as well. We'll bury this Kansas City talk. That's the last take I'll have. I do think we'll probably have to come back to this if and when, while we're doing the show, we learn what the actual suspension is and we can see, where things move. Because part of me still does think that some of these players are going to move even more when the official suspension happens, even though we have a general idea of how long that suspension is going to be.
Yeah, there's definitely the reacting to the hard news that people are just going to, you look at it just at a brief point when it comes to when DraftKings has somebody as out, as I put air quotes up for those listening on their podcatchers, like the Ricky Pearsall dip was outrageous, right?
Yes.
Like people were just freaking out about Ricky Pearsall for no reason.
You were getting Ricky Pearsall at times at the end of the 8th round, like last week. It's like that's why the reactions to the market to me have been so insane and so unpredictable. Because on one hand, I would expect some, a minor dip for Ricky Pearsall starting on the PUP, despite the fact if you just click a link, you can read that, all these guys start on PUP and he's likely going to be fine. Sure, maybe 3 or 4 picks or something like that. No, it was like at times like 18 picks, right? Like it was like a legitimate drop for Pearsall. So on one hand, there's a strong reaction. On the other, there's not. And then another instance like this is the Browns, is Cleveland. Like right now, Quinshon Judkins, it is almost August when we're recording this. It's July 29th. This will be out on July 30th on my daughter's birthday. Happy birthday, Avery. It'll be out. And it's almost August. Quinshon Judkins still doesn't have a contract. The Browns today were saying that they're hopeful that he's just going to be a Cleveland Brown, that things get fixed and set. Like, this is not pointing in a great direction for Judkins right now, which means look at the backfield. It's Dylan Sampson and it's Jerome Ford. And then you look at the news items, and I do feel like some of the coach speak / some of the training camp news has not gotten to DraftKings the way I thought it was going to get to DraftKings. There's two instances. One is the Cleveland one with Jerome Ford in particular, where Kevin Stefanski said that Ford would be the starter, essentially, which makes sense when Dylan Sampson is a day 3 running back who, not a bad prospect at all, but not someone who you would envision shouldering the workload right away. And then you look at the veteran and on a team that's probably going to see negative game scripts. I was drafting Jerome Ford before all the Judkins stuff because of the negative game script factor. And yes, he's risen in ADP, but it's still pretty crazy to me that there's oftentimes you'll go, and again, I'm going to go anecdotal here because I think it's important to not just look at the overall ADP, but say like, this is still happening in drafts frequently, right? And I'm drafting at least 3 teams a day at this point. And so a lot of times Jerome Ford will go 2 or 3 rounds after Dylan Sampson. And maybe the argument here is that Sampson has more end of season upside and upside in general. But I would actually argue that Sampson doesn't necessarily have that the same way you think he does, because Quinshon Judkins might be back by then. Like that would be when Judkins could dig into Sampson's workload more. Whereas Ford is the player who's probably going to have a pass catching role for most of the season and at least would be front loaded with that work without Quinshon Judkins. So like, that's a weird one to me. And then let me ask you this though, actually, before I move on to this last backfield, what is the Cleveland ADP looking like right now?
Yeah, so Sampson is going off at 147 right now, and Jerome Ford is 170. So those 2 rounds are the standard right now. And yeah, every time I'm building these hero or zero RB builds and I need somebody to throw a dart at to get some volume with in the 15th round, there's Jerome Ford just staring at me right in the face.
Every time. And look, this isn't even an anti-Sampson take. Like I had both of them in the draft guide this past week as late round dart throws because I am not feeling good about the Judkins stuff.
Look, I love taking on risk. I'm all about taking on risk. I've probably done more 2 QB and 2 tight end builds than I should on DraftKings when we have 20 rounds. I am not touching this dude at all.
Yeah. Why would you, right? Like this could go in so many, and not only that, but like situationally, it's not like this is a phenomenal place for a running back to be. And he had question marks himself on the pass catching front, like as a prospect. So like there were a lot of red flags to begin with at his original ADP. And now with all this stuff off the field, it's just really hard for me to click his name almost anywhere on the board. I haven't drafted him once. So, I mean, I think I have 1 or 2 drafts where I took him before all this stuff went on, like since the beginning of May, like in the Millie, but I haven't drafted him since. It's just really difficult to. So yeah, like the Jerome Ford, Dylan Sampson gap is still bizarre to me, especially when you consider the difference between like getting a guy in round 17 to round 15. Like it's the same thing, you know, it's not, or round 16 to 14. Opportunity cost doesn't shift that dramatically, but Sampson will often, like I've seen Sampson go in like round 12 and Ford still going round 15, round 16. So that's sort of where I'm at with the Browns backfield. I'm drafting both of them, but mostly when Sampson falls and Ford is just seemingly always there. He just always seems to be a decent value. And then the Jacksonville thing is the one that I really want to dig into. Not that we haven't really dug into the other 2 situations, but man, I've seen discourse about Tank Bigsby just all over the freaking place over the last 48 hours, maybe even longer. Maybe we'll say like 5 days. But Bigsby is getting a lot of steam out of camp. A lot of beat reporters are saying he's running with the ones. You know, a lot of them are singing his praises and saying good things. And then Bashal Tutin got banged up yesterday. It sounds like he's okay, but like he's not getting the kind of work that, you know, a Tutin truther, if you will. I mean, I think I'm a Tutin truther, so I'll throw myself in there. It's not the kind of work that you like want to see. And look, I'm not trying to overreact to this kind of situation, but I do want to talk about, and I wrote a newsletter about this. I do want to talk about, and this is a season long thing just as much as it's a best ball thing. When we're getting reports from beat writers, we can't just like an example of this is Minnesota, right? There was a report today that came out that Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones are going to have like a almost 50-50 type split in the backfield, or like maybe it's not quite 50-50, but it's closer to that than previous O'Connell, you know, situations and regimes. And, you know, you look at that and you're like, oh man, okay, let's say Minnesota scores 300 fantasy points in their backfield. I don't know. It's just a random number. We'll just split that in half. We'll give Jordan Mason half of it. We'll give Aaron Jones half of it because this is a backfield split. And that's how a lot of people think about this stuff. Like I've already seen tweets being like, why is Aaron Jones going ahead of Jordan Mason when this is a 50-50 split? Shouldn't they be going back to back? guys, for the love of God, one running back does not play the same position as another running back, right? Like, I'm not saying that Jordan Mason can't or won't outscore Aaron Jones. I'm saying the logic behind the ADP gaps is the fact that Aaron Jones is a pass catching back and Jordan Mason has quite literally never played that role, both in the NFL and in college, because in college he played with Jahmyr Gibbs, right? So you combine these factors, an early down back, right? In an offense that he's still going to split work, probably not going to see that much receiving work. And yes, he'll probably be the goal line guy. You just have to do your projections and work it out and say, okay, this is where this guy ranks. This is where this guy ranks. And I think that where they're being placed right now makes sense based on that, because pass catching is so important in the game, in the game of fantasy football. Then we look at what's going on in Jacksonville, and all of a sudden people are like, Tank Bigsby's their RB1. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does Tank Bigsby being the RB1 really mean in that backfield? And to me, if you look at his history, he's never been an efficient pass catcher. Now, I liked Tank Bigsby a lot as a prospect coming out. The model really liked Tank Bigsby as a prospect. His raw volume as a receiver was strong, and I care about that more than I do efficiency. But it's really, really difficult to look. Every year in college, he was either basically at average or below average across all of college football in yards per route run. And then his first 2 years in the NFL, his yards per route run is 0.36. Okay, which I can't even explain to you guys how dreadful that is. That is one of the most depressing statistics that you will ever hear me say. Okay, if you look since 2011, there have been 9 running backs, including Tank Bigsby, who are at a 0.5, which is higher than where Bigsby's at, yards per route run or lower, while running at least 100 routes. So their first 2 years, they run at least 100 routes, and they're at a 0.5 yards per route run rate or lower. Okay. If you look at all of those 8 other running backs and their max target share in the NFL, so any season after that, it doesn't have to be in one of those first 2 seasons, only one of them was over the 5% mark in target share per game. And it was Terrence West, who was at 7%. So like, we don't see pass catching profiles emerge. And if you raise that threshold a little bit to 0.6 instead of 0.5, you get a little bit more hits. You get like Mark Ingram is part of that, but he also got off to a slow start in his career. J.K. Dobbins is part of that, which, you know, he hasn't necessarily been like an ultra pass catcher yet in the NFL. So like, there's a little bit more hits when you like start to raise that threshold, which is like that. Of course there is, because yards per route run does correlate to target share success. But my point being is we have to, you know, in my opinion, of course, I've seen the best ball world fight over this Tank Bigsby stuff where it's either he's the RB1 on his team or you still have to fade him. And where I stand, shockingly, is somewhere in the middle, where we should react to this idea that Bigsby, you know, he might get more early down work than we're projecting, but we also are questioning what his receiving profile looks like, while also recognizing that because the receiving profile is probably not going to be there, you know, 95% plus chance that it's not going to be there, then that means the other guys in that backfield, Etienne or Tootin in my case, who I think, those guys have the hypothetical higher ceiling when we're projecting range of outcomes. The problem here, man, is that Tank Bigsby's ADP, despite all of this steam, is not really shifting that much on DraftKings. Like, I draft him today at 154 overall. You know, I'm drafting Bigsby quite a bit. And when you're in those double digit rounds and you're in a best ball environment where you don't have to predict or project when that touchdown might hit, to me, if you know that he's going to get some volume, even if it's not a league winning volume, I think that in a weekly game like best ball is, more so than what season long generally is. Obviously you're playing weekly, but it's a little bit of a different beast. I think Bigsby's a great pick right now because we're getting this information from beats, and it seems like we're not, as a market, really deploying that and using that enough and utilizing that enough. Maybe it has to do with the ambiguous backfield idea and how everyone's going to kind of have their guy. But as the person who has probably written about ambiguous backfields more than almost anyone, I can tell you that it's not as simple as just like find your dude and only draft your dude. Right. The idea behind,
you want to have all the guys.
Yeah,
like it's literally ambiguous. It's in the name.
Exactly. The idea behind it is that you want exposure to these situations because this exact situation where cost stays low because there are other players keeping it low. Like, I see Tank Bigsby right now as a potential arbitrage off of Brian Robinson. Of course, I would like Brian Robinson more from a projection standpoint, all that kind of stuff. But think of it. Think about it. You have Travis Etienne versus Austin Eckler as the established veterans who, Eckler's a better pass catcher, but could hypothetically serve a similar-ish role in their offenses. You have the early down bruiser in Brian Robinson and Tank Bigsby. And then, oh, by the way, there's this emerging rookie talent in Washington is Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. And in Jacksonville, it's Bashal Tutin. Like, to me, it's a very, very similar kind of situation where, you guys know by now that I've been basically fading Brian Robinson, and maybe it comes back to bite me. But my reasoning for doing that is because if the idea is that he could walk into 13 touchdowns and that's how he's going to pay off, Tank Bigsby can do that too. Given these reports and given the way they're currently deploying him, you have to think about that in his range of outcomes, right? That's where things shift for me. Neither guy is likely going to be a top 12 fantasy asset because they don't have the receiving numbers and the receiving profile. But yeah, there's a lot of players that are, in that sort of like you could argue to a degree that Jordan Mason's the same way, right? And so if we're going to be drafting and getting exposure to those kinds of players in the single digit rounds, I'm going to try to find arbitrage to get them 5 rounds later. And that to me, at least could be Tank Bigsby.
Yeah, Bigsby going off right at 155.7, so right where you nabbed him today, top of the 14th round. I think I said on one of the earlier episodes when we were talking about Tutin and we were talking about the Jags backfield is I thought the worst opinion this summer on the Jags backfield was just going to have a strict opinion on one of the guys being the guys, because new offense, Liam Cohen, all these guys have their path to having some sort of upside. Of course, the young guy and Etienne from a pass catching perspective and Bigsby from a touchdown variance perspective. But yeah, I'm just getting all these guys. Wherever they fit my builds, I'm getting a piece of all 3 of these guys, because you can tell a story that any 3 of these guys have success this year on the Jags.
And I think that's where I'm really trying to learn and grow as a best ball player. Is that of course, Brian Robinson should be drafted ahead of Tank Bigsby. That's not what I'm trying to say when I'm talking about the arbitrage here. What I am saying is, if in this game, we're trying to look more at 75th percentile outcomes, 80th percentile outcomes, if we do that with Brian Robinson and Tank Bigsby, it's really not that far off from one another, right? And so that's why maybe the floor, sure, but we shouldn't be drafting for floor. That's the problem. Where Brian Robinson goes, oftentimes you're taking him ahead of Ricky Pearsall or some really interesting year 2 or up and coming wide receivers, or maybe you're taking him over a TJ Hawkinson and you really want a tight end or what have you. There are guys in the 10th round that I think are a big deal to take to take Brian Robinson over. And so to me, I'm just trying to sort of gobble up that archetype and see if I can get that kind of player late. And because of the news items, even while knowing that he's not that much of a pass catcher, him not being that much of a pass catcher places him in this archetype bucket, right? And then these news items can allow you to then just be 10 spots ahead of the market on him. And then all of a sudden you have a decent amount of Tank Bigsby exposure. And hey, what if he is this year's Raheem Mostert or Jamal Williams or whomever, where he gets a 5% target share, but is able to find the end zone 15 times? I think that, it's not likely, but I think that there's a distinct possibility that Jacksonville is pretty good. And that's why we're targeting this backfield. And Bigsby's the one who finds the end zone the most. And
like you said, this team it's 6 picks over the last week, from mid 14th to an early 14th. So you're not paying much.
And then Ricky Pearsall's dropping a round and a half because he's on PUP.
I literally couldn't believe that. I was walking away from 7 of 8 drafts with Pearsall, and I didn't care because I'm gonna take that falling value.
Yeah, it's just that's why that was the theme of the show for me. It was I can't get a read on the market with the news items and with the changes. It's wild. It's crazy. It's so much fun. You guys can comment away and give us your ideas and all that kind of stuff and tell me I'm a moron for the way that I'm thinking about this. But it is the way that I'm thinking about this, in the end. All right, let's get to the guest today. Davis Mattek, friend of mine for over a decade at this point. I've known him since he was basically in diapers. Mattek does the Swolecast, the Takecast. He's got his YouTube channel now. It's just his name, Davis Mattek. We talked about transitioning from season long to best ball, which was a good discussion. we talked about why he thinks Brock Bowers is the best pick on DraftKings right now. We did talk some suspension stuff, so you might hear a little bit of a similar take as what I just talked through, but I think it's still very, very important and so much more. So without further ado, here's the interview with Davis Mattek. All right, Davis, I'm going to give you a scenario to kick off today's show. All right. There's been a season-long bro who's been winning his season-long league for years now. And now...
Can't relate.
Yeah, exactly. And now that he's been winning so much, he's like, you know what? I want to dive into best ball. I want to play best ball instead of playing season-long, or on top of season-long, I should say. What's the one piece of advice that you would give him or her, but I said bro at the start of this, but give this person before they really dive in and do their first best ball draft?
That you can be absolutely right about everything for the first 15 weeks of the season, and it won't matter at all. I think thinking of best ball the same way you think about your season-long fantasy league will make you do a lot of suboptimal things. Mm-hmm. I think you're really going to overvalue safety. I think you're really going to overvalue archetypes of guys that you just know have a job. And this is not even just a running back thing. You know, this isn't just a James Conner thing. This is a De'Ami Brown thing. This is a Jacoby Myers thing. Not that you should never take those guys or whatever, but the goal of the game is to generate the highest score the final week of December, the first week of January, and everything should be built from optimizing backwards from that.
I think the one thing that we should kind of expand on here that I don't know if I really have, but I'm sure someone has the question. But when you say that you need to score the most points in that final week, someone might push back and say, well, why wouldn't I be doing that also in my season long league? So can you talk about the difference between, you know, at the end of the day, likely that it comes down to the fact that it's a 50-50 outcome versus a one in many outcome. But can you talk about like what that all means with best ball versus season long?
No, I actually think that it's super specific in season long how different it is, because we all have had this experience. So the first thing being, what I try and optimize for as much as possible in my home leagues is getting the bye. So a top 2 seed, just because you have one extra game that you don't have to win. By the time you get to week 10, week 11, week 13, I mean, look, man, your buddies are not making waiver. I mean, maybe they are. Maybe you're in like a crazy hyper competitive league and people want to win the consolation bracket, but you kind of can pick and choose. You'll generally speaking be able to get, you know, the best kickers, the best streamers, right? You'll be able to get the best streamers, and you'll just be rotating through a bunch of rookie running backs. I was actually looking at my team that won my home league last year. Humble brag.
Yeah, humble brag there.
Happen. Every good waiver wire guy, the final month of the season, I had him. You know, I was optimizing for streaming matchups. Like, these really are just different things. So I don't necessarily want to optimize for the best score in week 17 for my home league. In your home league, you kind of just want a juggernaut. You kind of just want like your 5th bench guy to be a quality fantasy starter.
Yeah, I mean, and at the end of the day, like on DraftKings, you're playing against 1,000 people in that final week of the season, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas, so you need that monster week from a scoring perspective. More like you could realistically win your season long championship with an 80-point week in a PPR format, like a normal, like it can happen, right? Because what if your opponent just has a bad week and something happens or what have you? You're literally never going to get that done in a best ball environment. So that shift does happen with, you know, what you're looking for. And obviously, you know, what you're alluding to as well is the ability to pick up players off the waiver wire and be able to manipulate your team as the season goes on, as opposed to having to draft in July and August or June and May and not be able to do that with your rosters. Now, looking at DraftKings, one of the questions I've been asking a lot of best ball bros that have come on the show, are you in or out on the 3 quarterback build this year? Is it something that you're doing like 95% of the time? Is it something that you're doing just 50-50? Sort of what's that weight look like for you?
No, this is like 90% of the time, because in particular, I think Anthony Richardson, Tyler Shuck, and Jackson Dart are such obviously good picks on DraftKings, where you have 20 roster spots. And actually, a weird thing on DraftKings is just like, I don't know if it's the generated order, I don't know if their ADP thing is weird, but like, you know, guys like Tank Dell and stuff and Christian Watson are hanging out in like the 220s. But if you scroll a little bit more, you get to like a bunch of guys with like real roles, like I mean, not that anyone should be that excited about these guys, but like Dontavian Wicks and A.D. Mitchell, or even like Brashard Smith and things like that. Like they don't even get taken 100% of the time. So like a lot of the times I'm just sitting there in round 18 and I'm like, all right, Tyler Shuck, let's do it. I think even when you have like a Josh Allen type, to me, it just seems like 3 quarterbacks is so clearly the strategy people should be using.
Yeah, and it seems like when I do get that elite quarterback, like if I get a Josh Allen or whomever, in those early rounds, that third quarterback, it's like you said, it's so easy to just get like Jackson Dart, because you can just, you not only can get him in round 18, but you can also just stack him with either Theo Johnson or Darius Slayton, even if you have nothing to do with that game going into that part of the draft in that team. So I'm with you. It seems like, so let me ask this. If you have, let's say, Kyler Murray and Joe Burrow, maybe that's probably not the best example because they're playing each other in week 17, but regardless, let's just say you have like Kyler and Burrow or Burrow and Dak. Is that a situation where you would at least consider a 2 quarterback build, or is it still you're going to try to at least force the 3 quarterback build?
I mean, I think it's really all you want to know what it is. It's a little bit of a psychological thing too, where you're like, God, do I really need to take Jacory Krosky-Merritt? Like, this dude's just going to get cut. He's never going to play. He's going to be behind Jeremy McWeapon. I might as well take a guy. What I would do less of with Burrow and Dak is like take Bryce Young,
right?
Or even like Sam Darnold. Darnold is now up to like the 16th round on DraftKings. Like, I would be doing less of that. To me, it just feels like Shuck and Dart in particular would have to be so bad when they played to not add points to the average. Like, it would be very hard for them to not add points to the average DraftKings roster.
And are you going for that third quarterback because you want that extra out in the most important weeks? Is it more for those 3 weeks, as 3 playoff weeks, as opposed to like what's going on in the regular season?
A little bit of both. I mean, adding in that random week 17 stack is really nice. When Karain won his big best ball tournament, Daniel Jones was the quarterback that contributed the score. So stuff like that does happen. It's actually more of an advance rate play though, just because over the course of 15. And to be clear, to go back to my initial answer, like advance rate is still very much important because you can't control what happens in week 17. Like doing things to suboptimally hurt your advance rate in names of like uniqueness, I think is bad. But so it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B there. Yeah.
All right. So with elite tight ends, then, you on DraftKings, you have Bowers usually goes in that early second range. McBride goes, I mean, sometimes McBride slides to like the mid third, but usually at that 2-3 turn area, and then Kittle at the 3-4 turn. Do you categorize the elite tight ends as those 3? Number 1, I should ask. And then the second part to this, is that a position that you are spending up on because of the advantage they can give, or do you feel just good about what you can get in round 15, 16, 17, etc.? Because we are getting usable tight ends late in these drafts versus, even at quarterback. Yes, we just talked about Jackson Dart and Tyler Shuck and such, but the guys who are actually playing all season long, like the Genos or the Bryce Young or whomever, they have risen a little bit in ADP, which, changes the dynamic of like early round quarterbacks maybe being a little bit more attractive if you want to squint a little bit. And then, but with tight end, if you're getting usable guys in round 18, 19, 20, does that make you want to wait more, or are you getting the elite one?
I mean, Brock Bowers might just be like overall the best pick on DraftKings. He just, it's, the 100-yard bonuses, full point PPR. I mean, it would not surprise me if Brock Bowers, subtracting the quarterbacks, was like a top 3 skill position player in terms of raw points on DraftKings this year. Really wouldn't surprise me at all. There is just like a window of tight ends on DraftKings that is so appealing though, when all the good skill position players are gone, and then you're left with Tyler Warren, David Njoku, Tucker Kraft, Dallas Goedert, just like kind of that whole range of guys. I find myself quite often sitting there round 10 and being like, well, yeah, I'm just going to take David Njoku. He's going to catch 80 passes. Like it's fine. Not that I dislike, I'll tell you the one I don't draft a ton of is Kittle, because he is sort of penalized by the format, like rewarding a full point per reception. Cause even like a really good Kittle season is probably 80 catches, like a nutted season. He's more of a touchdown guy. Not that I never draft Kittle. He's just not a core part of my strategy.
Yeah, I think you make a good point though, where like I can make an argument for basically all, if you want to just categorize the tight ends in like 3 spots where you're talking elite, middle round, and late. I feel like on DraftKings, the way drafts have sorted and ADP has sort of shifted and sorted out, you could probably make an argument for each pocket in some way. Like, I definitely can make the argument for Bowers, McBride, and Kittle very easily, obviously. And then the tier that you were talking about with like I got a ton of Dallas Goedert because there's contingent upside and he's just a forgotten about dude oftentimes, or like a Tucker Kraft or whomever. But then there are like the Tyler Higbees of the world who could easily be usable, in the last round of your draft and so on. So like, I don't know. I feel like last year was, when you look at best ball, last year was a year where you really had to sort of decide how you were going to attack tight end, because it was either like we had this giant cluster of these earlier round guys. This year, I feel like you can go in a lot of different directions. Like, are you there? Are your builds varying at the position? It seems like.
I mean, I think that is like the optimal strategy, going back to telling the guy, like, I don't think you should do the same thing a bunch, because then your season just ends up kind of being tied to like 6 guys doing well. And if they don't do well, then it doesn't matter if you randomly pulled out a 2025 Kyron Puka team if you're held down by a bunch of dead weight at the top of it. I would say, like, if I had to rank them in order of how I liked it, I would say number 1 strategy is Bowers or McBride early, and then 2 really late guys like a Jatavian Sanders, Juwan Johnson combo, followed by 2 of the mid-tier guys, like do a double tap Warren and Njoku, Kraft, whatever. And then the one that I really wouldn't do a ton is 3 late guys. That just feels like you're just not giving yourself enough ceiling. Like, if your tight end room is Mike Gesicki, Oronde Gadsden, and
Dalton
Harold
Schultz
Fannin, Dalton Schultz. Yeah, it's just like you could maybe limp by, but I think you're going to have a hard time finding spike weeks.
Yeah. Are there any late round tight ends, though, that you are going after? I mean, we just named some random dudes, as just like a laughable picks, but it does feel like there are some interesting guys that are going late.
I mean, late and rational is Juwan Johnson and Theo Johnson, who are just starting tight ends on their team and are probably each going to catch 50 passes. Late and irrational are Oronde Gadsden II for the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, I think he probably is the best receiving tight end on the team, but I don't know if that means he's going to run 30% of the routes or 60%. And true irrational is Harold Fannin for the Cleveland Browns. Basically, you just say there's no Jamari Thrash is not a slot wide receiver. Deontay Johnson doesn't exist. I mean, look, the coaching staff and the play caller, Stefanski and I forget the name of the offensive coordinator, did both say like, oh yeah, I mean, we think he could probably catch 50 passes if we asked him to. So, I mean, that's kind of more of do as I say, not as I do, because I am taking those guys, but I wouldn't be taking a ton of Fannin and Gadsden, but a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, how do you handle, like, with a guy like Gadsden, let's say, who doesn't get drafted in every draft? I don't know what his total exposure is and ownership is across all drafts
really
right now.
Low.
Yeah, let's say that if a guy's sub 10%, sub 15%, and what I mean by that for those listening is if a player is only drafted in 10 to 15% of overall drafts, does that make you want to be extra overweight, or is that a situation where, like, if you're at 10 or 11 or 12%, you don't need to be at 10, 11 or 12%, because obviously even if your exposure is at 5 or 6%, you're still overweight versus where the market's at. But like, if you're like Gadsden, for instance, are you just like, I'll be overweight on this dude. He's my tight end 3. I know that I'm getting an extra edge with him because people aren't drafting him, or are you kind of pulling it back because the market kind of knows what it's doing?
I would say I don't care at tight end all that much about ownership type stuff. Like, it's really, tight end is pretty binary in terms of like, are you one of the guys who scores 8 touchdowns?
Yeah.
Or does he not? At like running back and wide receiver, that can be like a pretty useful decision-making tool. Like, a good example from last year was Andre Yoshivas being like, okay, once he started getting the camp buzz, that all these teams that got drafted from May to June, like, he literally probably was like 0% drafted. So that is like a really strong reason to start taking someone. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who I did just mention earlier, he would be a good one. Like, really low drafted rate. He's getting a little bit of buzz now. Elijah Mitchell for the Chiefs, like, seeming like he's just like a really strong bet to make the roster. Whereas Kareem Hunt is like basically 100% drafted on DraftKings for some reason that I don't quite understand.
I don't think I've clicked his name once so far.
It's very strange.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the looming suspensions. I talked to Levitan about this a little bit last week. I opened the show about it a little bit last week, but I want as many perspectives as possible because I think it's one of the bigger things that we have to worry about right now, especially right now, but just in general, until we learn for sure, how long these guys are going to be out. But we're sitting here looking at Rashee Rice, Jordan Addison is likely going to be suspended. Quinshon Judkins doesn't even have a contract right now, so it's even more difficult to figure out what the heck's going to go on there. I mean, obviously he hasn't gone through the legal process like Addison and Rashee Rice have. How do you handle that, all of the suspension stuff? And do you think the market on DraftKings has shifted enough with these players, and where they're generally being drafted right now? Or do you think that like one example that I go back to, and I've brought this up on the show in the past, and I talk about it on my live streams because there's someone who I've gone back and forth with about Addison. Like Addison no one's been handed their suspension yet, right? We all kind of know something's coming with like Addison in particular. You can sit here and say that you think where Addison goes right now is actually a fair price, even with the looming suspension. Like if you were to get 3 games and he's going in like the early to mid 7th, you're like, yeah, that's still fine. That's a fine price. But are you a believer that the market, once it officially learns that Jordan Addison is suspended for 3 games, his price is going to fall more? Or are we sitting in a position right now where a guy like Rice, a guy like Addison, they're properly priced right now and we should be attacking those players?
I bet when he like actually gets the official red O on DraftKings, he probably slips a little bit more. I think it's like pretty negligible though. Like I don't think it's going to be like a full round. Or
I think
anything. I'd be
the
surprised.
way I've seen it is like it's like probably like a half round, and like the opportunity cost really isn't that significant when you're talking about that half round. Like look at what's going on around. But then I look at like Ricky Pearsall goes on is on the pup
because he had the O.
Right,
he had
that's what I'm saying.
out.
And Pearsall, we were drafting him in early 7, right? And then all of a sudden you're getting him in the late 8. Like it was like almost a 2-round difference at times. So I'm trying to really figure out if I should just get Addison exposure right now when it falls in my lap and where I feel good about it, or is it something that I should just be waiting on? Because people are reactive to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I just have him like right about at market.
Yeah.
He's not like a huge part of my strategy this year, nor am I like outright fading him. A pretty key difference between best ball in your home league is like actually like Addison, Rice, like let's say Judkins gets a 6-game suspension, Ayuk, let's say he's on the pup. These guys are dead weight in like a much worse way in your league because it prevents you from making potential league winning moves.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I mean, I drafted Jordan Addison. I'm not going to cut him, and I can't cut this other roster clogger yet. And therefore, I didn't pick up Sean Tucker, who actually ended up getting 13 carries the next week for the Buccaneers.
Right.
And my buddy did, and I lost my league. But these decisions are made, they're set. And most of these suspensions are taking place at the time of the year that we would like them to have happen in best ball is before the bye week start, before your entire injury, before your roster started to be decimated by injuries. Like if Rashee Rice is, I'd be curious. One of these nerds out there should run this. I don't have the capability of doing this, but run Rashee Rice for a full season at, 16.1 fantasy points per game over the whole season. And then subtract the first 4 weeks of the season on an average best ball roster. And like, how much does that change the advance rate? Cause I'm going to guess probably not much, not as much as you would think.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And that's why, but the weird thing, it's like this weird combination of like, when we got the Rashee Rice news, let's talk about Rice really quick. Cause I know that you've been on like Worthy too and et cetera. So I really want to dig into like the situation, but like when the Rashee Rice news dropped, okay, I did, 8 to 12 drafts over the next 2 days. And during those drafts, Rice was consistently still a late 2nd round pick on DraftKings. There was someone who had tagged me, I think it was Matthew Betts, had tagged me and showed me that Rice went 204 in a draft after the news had dropped. And so to me, the obvious thing to say is that his ADP should drop to some degree, right? Like it shouldn't just remain stagnant. But I think the question is he now someone that you should take in the mid 3rd? Is he now someone that you should be taking in the late 4th? Is it someone that you're avoiding? Like, where do you think the proper area for Rice is? And then I'll ask you on top of that, like the Worthy versus Rice dynamic and how you feel about, what Worthy could do to start the season. I know you were already heavy on Worthy to begin with, but like, I'm assuming you're drafting Worthy ahead of Rice as a result of this? And were you doing that before? Like, where are you at with the whole Kansas City situation?
No, I had Rice ahead of Worthy. I think the right spot for Rice now is kind of that 4 or 5 turn Sutton, Jameson Williams, that group of guys. I moved Worthy way up in my stuff. I mean, I had Worthy ahead of ADP this whole time, but I moved him up to the low 30s. Like I think he's 31 in my stuff. The point being, I'm higher on Worthy as a player. I do think that Worthy hits in a season where the Chiefs just run back that awful stuck in the mud offense anyways, because he showed that he was pretty capable of kind of facilitating the horizontal stuff that they were missing without Rice. And if you are of the mind that Kelsey is like dusty, then there's going to be even more of a need for the horizontal stuff. And then obviously, if they do return to 2020, 2021 Chiefs, I don't think any player stands to benefit more from that than Worthy. And the running game, what are we expecting out of the running back twos, like Hunt, Mitchell, Smith? I mean, we saw Worthy stuff be a replacement for that last year. Of all the Chiefs players, I think Worthy is the one who's just most clearly the fantasy buy because of Rice's suspension.
Yeah, the weird thing is that Worthy has not seemed to rise quite as much as I expected on DraftKings. Like he's still I get him in the fourth.
People
frequently.
think he sucks. People just think he's bad.
And look, I had my question marks more so from a season long perspective, but I had my question marks about how he was going to be deployed, and I still am not totally all in on the Chiefs just being turning they didn't change offensive coordinator. I think Matt Nagy's part of the problem with how they've been operating the last couple of years. And also Worthy did shift his production got better when they shifted his deployment and stuff. And like you said, more of that horizontal stuff. But I think the Kelsey point is really valid. And also I don't know how you don't react to the Rashee Rice news with Worthy, because now not only is there, this general out of, Rice just not being able to play for some of this time, but there's also the idea that Xavier Worthy is a second-year wide receiver who was a good prospect who came on towards the end of last year, and now he could play a pretty significant role for the first chunk of the season. And what if that's stickier than what people are projecting? It almost feels like the market is just assuming that when Rice is back, everything just kind of goes back to what was being projected by the market in general, right? Where Rice is this 25% target share guy, Worthy's an 18% guy, and maybe he gets some big plays, but it's going to be inconsistent, yada, yada, yada. But I think that the main crux of this is that the market's not really factoring in what Xavier Worthy could do during that time to establish himself more, right? To be more of that dude. And so I've been surprised that he's been more in that mid fourth range frequently, 407, 408. He's there pretty often when that's not even far off from his ADP before all this happened. That's basically where he was being drafted. It's just so bizarre to me that there hasn't really been that reaction to suspension, which then goes back full circle, leads me to believe that when games actually drop, when we know Rice is out for 4 games or he's out for 6 or however long it's going to be, when we know that Jordan Addison is out for 2 or 3 games, however long it's going to be, that's when the market just seems to react a little bit more, just based on, what we've witnessed.
I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. You hit on the obvious reasons to expect Worthy to play better. And my guess is you're probably correct that there will be an additional upward movement when the NFL says Rice is suspended 4 games, 6 games. Although it is bizarre to see 2 clearly interconnected players and see the news impact one of them, but not really impact the other one. It's quite strange. Yeah, I agree.
It's really strange, especially because the other dude is not Juju Smith-Schuster. You know what I mean? We're talking about a legitimate prospect who was very good, towards the end of last season. Obviously, he got off to a slow start, who has question marks. Don't get me wrong. It's not like he has a flawless profile and he's undersized and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like the kind of player that would rise in ADP with this kind of news. And it just hasn't happened. So, anyone listening, I know Davis signs off on this because he's been high on Worthy. But I've gotten the majority of my Worthy exposure, or a lot of Worthy exposure over the last 2 weeks. And I haven't really lost any sort of equity in doing that, or any sort of advantage in doing that, just because his ADP hasn't changed. And I think there might be, maybe there is a chance that we see a rise still to come once we hear the Rashee Rice suspension. One question that I've asked some prospective guests that I think is really important, because it's kind of a difficult question to answer, in my opinion, you look at the wide receivers ranked like 20th to 40th, and you look at them and you're like, yeah, I can make an argument for this guy. I can make an argument for this guy. Are there any players in that range that you actually just feel terrible about and that you're mostly fading?
I mean, I don't love Cortland Sutton. I don't love Jacoby Myers. I'll tell you, Judy is probably going to end up being fine, but he's very tough to draft on DraftKings, where getting your quarterback stacks lined up should kind of be what you're thinking from the time you make your first pick. And so to just eliminate one of your wide receivers from adding in a quarterback later is pretty tough. I don't love Terry McLaurin. He's a little bit more expensive. Although I did just get him at 45 today, this morning in a DraftKings Millie Maker, and like that is a totally appropriate price. Yeah,
I think it's the holdout and stuff that's pushing him down a little bit recently. I've seen him go 4-5 turn in some drafts where I wasn't going to take him at the 3-4 where I was, and then obviously he ends up falling that far. The Judy thing, like I talked about this on Perspectives last week with Andrew Cooper. The Judy thing, I totally vibe with. To me, if you're getting a similar archetype player or a similar like projected output player in that range, and there's a lot of them in that range, just a cluster of like solid talents that could obviously give you some production this year, why would you not use the tiebreaker as, can I stack this guy? And I mean, are you taking any Cleveland quarterback right now? Like, have you leaned into any of them, even on DraftKings where you get 20 rounds, or have you just mostly faded?
No, because you're having to hit you're just having to hit such a gnarly parlay. You have to hit, okay, you get the one who's starting. I mean, if not weeks 15, 16, 17, at least week 17. Then you need to hit the parlay that Cleveland is throwing enough to get there. Now, with Jameis, they did lead the NFL in dropbacks per game, like super PRE. I would guess that if your quarterback room, like if they're starting Gabriel or Shadur, they are probably just going to be so bad and ground heavy and brutal. Like I can't, honestly, if you told me Flacco 17 games or he starts every game, he's healthy, I would take him some, but I think it's like you got a 3rd round rookie quarterback, a 5th round rookie quarterback. Kenny Pickett did just injure his hamstring and might go on the pup. So maybe people start clicking Flacco a little bit, but Judy's just a very tough click for me.
And yeah, I know. And the thing with Flacco though, it's similar to like Russell Wilson, where you draft him and you're like, is this guy actually going to be playing for me when it matters most in those weeks that we were just talking about earlier? And I feel much better about Jackson Dart playing at the end of the year. I feel probably even better about because the Browns are in a really competitive division. Like, what are the odds that Cleveland is a really competitive team as we get into like week 12, week 13, week 14, and all of a sudden they go to, but there's only, there's multiple outs instead of just going to Jackson Dart for the Giants. Now we're going to Shador or Gabriel or whomever. And it's just a really, really difficult, position and group to click and to draft. So that to me is one of the main reasons too, to not get Judy. Like I think there's reason outside of that where you look at his splits with and without Cedric Tillman, you look at his splits with and without Jameis last year. I know that Amari Cooper, moved, but I would argue that Cedric Tillman is a better player than what Amari Cooper is right now, considering no one's even talking about Amari Cooper, signing with a team and being an impactful player in 2025. So I just have my concerns. And like you said, with Jameis last year, they threw the ball a ton and Jerry Jeudy ran a ton of routes. He's been sort of my go-to. What do you feel about Zay Flowers? Like, is there a difference with him in like a best ball environment versus a season-long one? Or is that someone that you're fading or targeting?
Man, I think I'm probably wrong about this one. Like, I don't love Flowers, but if Flowers just ran into like an 11 touchdown season, he's been so efficient. And it feels like in a weird way, the Ravens' offensive efficiency has been bad for him because it just doesn't allow him to like amass volume. And Andrews and Likely, you would anticipate, kind of drawing more of a red zone share. And they are like they're like Eagles-esque in terms of just scoring rushing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. But some of these guys who I don't love, like Jacoby Myers or Judy or whatever, I'm like, well, I'm just not sure you're that good. I'm like really sure that he's that good.
Yes.
You know, like I'm really, really sure Zay Flowers is that good. So if he just ran into, like, I don't know, man, if you told me he caught 91 passes, I'd be like, oh, well, he was the guy you had to have in fantasy that year.
Look, I'm more on the fade side with him, and he's probably the scariest profile that I feel that way about, just because, like you said, his peripherals, his efficiency, so out of control. But then I look and I'm like, the dude's scoring like 4 or 5 touchdowns a year, and he's coming off a season where Lamar Jackson is not going to repeat what he did through the air last year, you know, from like a touchdown rate standpoint. Like, what are the odds that literally regression hits for Lamar and Zay all of a sudden? Because like Zay's expected touchdowns weren't very high either, because he's just not used in that way, right? And so to me, he's kind of like a really rock solid 3. You know, and obviously he has big play upside, so maybe that changes the dynamic in best ball. But I think he's one of the harder players to feel that way about, if you will. It's just really tough when you got like, you know, George Pickens and stuff, who just has like very clear upside in that area.
Very clear. Yes. Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct. And it's probably one of those things that I'm like wrong about, but it is hard to change the behavior, because I like a lot of the other players that go around him too. It's like, okay, who am I going to rank him over? You know what'll be the one that'll feel dumb in the end? It'll be Jalen Waddle. It'll be Jalen Waddle will just easily suck again, and Flowers will be awesome, and you'll be like, yeah, but the projected volume wasn't even close. Jalen Waddle was way better in the projections. Yeah,
no, you're definitely right. It's strange though. Like, do you feel like you know, especially with like the Stafford stuff, I don't know, you know, we don't know how serious the Stafford stuff is right now, but it's not nothing. He's had a hurt back. Yeah. And he's also like, trust me, I know, as being an old dad, you know, that your back, you know, what's funny out like that is I've actually done some scouting, because he was on Bryson DeChambeau's YouTube channel, this offseason. They golfed together, and he looked very nimble. And he's got quite a good golf. I mean, as you would anticipate, he has a pretty good swing. So I'm not worried. Yeah. The party line right now is I'm not worried. Yeah. I mean, I drafted him yesterday, so I'm hoping that he's fine. But my point is that when you get to that like mid-third area of DraftKings drafts, okay, where it's like JSN, you get into Devontae, who I've been really high on, you know, so that's why I brought up the Stafford thing, just because he's kind of part of that cluster. But you get JSN, even Marvin Harrison you can throw in there, and then you get into McLaurin. Does it feel like to you, because it feels like to me that I just prefer the value of the 5th round guys more than the value of those 3rd round guys, because there isn't necessarily such a dramatic teardrop there, and that's making me then more overweight on the 5th round guys. And then what that's also doing is then making it more difficult to draft a player like Zay Flowers. Is that sort of the experience that you've had, or are you just cool with just going wide receiver, like in that 3rd, like the JSNs, the Marvin Harrisons, the, you know, Terry, I guess you already mentioned the McLaurin stuff, but like that to me kind of feels like an anchor running back range at times. If like, you know, if the right guys, especially with Amari and Hampton there pretty frequently now, like it just feels like an easier spot to go running back. I'm just trying not to have my builds all be the same, but like I, at the end of the day, have felt better about the 5th round wideouts and the 3rd round wideouts. Are you there too?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of those guys just feel like they're there because they've always been there, because that's just what the rankings and the ADP was when it came out. But, you know, I don't know, like George Pickens and JSN feel like a coin flip to me, or Jameson Williams versus Terry McLaurin, right. or, you know, like even Marvin Harrison Jr., you know, like if Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jalen Waddle were going right back to back, I'd be like, I don't know, sure, I guess that basically makes sense. So I've been taking a ton of Hampton, Chase Brown, you know, these guys. And I think it's actually a good argument for maybe taking some of the elite quarterbacks more often than would be my preference. Is like, okay, well, I'll just take this awesome quarterback who I know is going to be awesome right now and make it up at wide receiver later. Yeah, I think it's a great point. It's one, you know, obviously there's going to be some drafts where like Lamar and Josh Allen are going like 2-3 turn, but when they go at ADP and they fall into the 3-4 turn pretty frequently, it makes more sense to probably go after them, just given the kind of flat tier of wide receiver that we see. Let me ask you what stacks you've been going after. It's something that everyone always wants to hear. Who are you overweight on from a team perspective? I mean, frankly, I guarantee if I pull my stuff up right now, the top team I have stacked is the Saints, just because of how cheap Tyler Shuck is, and even Rashid Shaheed. My top stacked team that costs anything, though, is the 49ers.
Yeah.
Easiest schedule in the NFL. I mean, do I love Ricky Pearsall? I mean, I have no idea if Ricky Pearsall is any good or not, but Pearsall, Jennings, Purdy, Guerrero, Jordan James, these guys are all, really, really nicely priced. Mid-tier type stuff, I really like doing May and then one of his guys a little bit later. And then I love doing Jordan Love and then Dubs and then Wicks.
Yes. DraftKings especially, I say this all the time, but for whatever reason, Jordan Love seems like he's the falling pocket passer most frequently. Like he's the one that and it's weird because you have a situation where you actually have multiple wideouts that go in front of him, and Golden and Reeds. There's other teams that would hypothetically want to be reaching for him to complete that stack. But like you said, you can get Kraft, you can make a turn and just get Kraft with Love. You can get Romeo Dubs a little bit later. You can get your boy Dontavian Wicks towards the end of the draft to pair with Love. So I like that call out a lot. All right. Last question for you. Give me some players on DraftKings right now that you think are just massively undervalued.
Hollywood Brown is one of them. Demario Douglas and Wan'Dale Robinson. No, look, they're not good picks.
I was going to say those are not very Davis Mattek picks.
They're not good picks.
Demario.
But what they allow you to do is they allow you to first take the suspended guys, Rice, Addison. You can get away with some Travis Hunter, some Golden, some Igbuka, like you're expecting those guys' production to kind of take a little bit of time. And then the slappy triumvirate of Byshell Tootin, Jaden Blue, and Brashard Smith are, I believe, my three most drafted running backs on DraftKings. The aforementioned Tyler Shuck, Juwan Johnson stack. You know what? Here's a spicy one. Here's an actual hot take. Brock Bowers in a full point per reception format probably should be going ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. and those guys. He could have an Amon-Ra St. Brown statistical season while being eligible at tight end, which is very valuable.
Yeah. Love those takes. Davis, as always, thanks for hopping on, talking some best ball. Let everyone know where they can find you, your YouTube channel, and what you're working on.
Yeah, everyone can get all my content at youtube.com/@Davis_Mattek. Then all of my written stuff, rankings, analysis, all that over at patreon.com/Davis Mattek. Thanks for having me on. When are you changing the title of the series to Became a Best Ball Bro? Is that next year? Is that for season 3?
We'll see how the results go, right? Last year wasn't the best overall. Really weird, structurally not sound season with the way that the running back position went. I don't know. I feel good about this year so far. I think I feel better this year than I did last year. A lot more learning, and I do things in drafts in live streams and stuff where other best ball bros are yeah, that was the right move. That was the smart thing to do. It's just a different, I think anyone who's making the transition from season long to best ball knows that when you start best ball, you're it's like the parabola meme where you're oh, I got this, or what, or Dunning-Kruger in a way, right? Where it's oh, this isn't that tough. Or as Kitchen would say, it's solvable. And then you start to dig in more and more, and you're
beatable.
Yeah. And then you dig in a little bit more. You're I know nothing. Right. And then as you kind of go in a little bit more, you get more and more comfortable. So we'll see how this year goes. Maybe next year is I've become a best ball bro and I can, have a different conversation with people, but we'll see, man. We'll see. Should be fun. Anyway, all my stuff you can find over on lateround.com. Make sure you are ordering that draft guide, which is available right now. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast, and make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. Once again, Davis, thanks for joining, and thanks to all of you, as always, for tuning in.